So last week, I'm not bringing a close-up of my arrangements in because I thought your arrangements were loads better than mine. And I really enjoyed seeing how you interpreted the brief to create this sort of wand, wasn't it really? It was sort of stuffed full of goodies. So we saw Christmas baubles, we saw apples, dried limes, and what I particularly liked as well were pine cones. And I think that one had a sort of double stack with a pine cone and an apple underneath. So really, really ingenious. So well done, all of you. And if you haven't yet made your project from last week, it doesn't matter. It's one for you to store in your memory bank. So if you find, you've got a lull at some point in the future, you could always go back and revisit that video. I just noticed in the camera, my cup of tea is going cold, so I should move that out of the way. So we are now on week 5. So there's only 5 more weeks till the festive period starts. And what we're going to be doing next week, if you are coming to class next week, is decorating a pillar candle. So I brought with you a candle in case you don't know what one looks like. I have got this, I think this candle originally probably came from the supermarket. So you will find there's a huge variation in cost for your candles. So do shop around and make sure you're not spending more than you can afford to spend, whether you want to have a single candle or whether you want to make a matching pair for either end of your table or your mantelpiece is entirely up to you. And we're going to create a structure. So those of you who came to Christmas Zoom flower classes last time round, we did do a decoration on a pillar candle, or we embellished a pillar candle. It's not the same technique as before, but if you've done that technique already we did last time, it's a sort of building on the technique, so taking your design skills up a level. And what you will need, or what I'm suggesting you bring with you, are the floristry stub wires. So these, my sort of go-to wires, about the 0.71 wire. You don't really want to go any finer. Those of you who've got a floristry toolkit, I would say a 0.56 is going to be too small, and certainly the rose wires. So the wires you use to make buttonholes are probably going to be a bit lightweight. You could go chunkier if you've got chunkier wires, but it's not a necessity. So what we're going to be doing is heating up the ends of the wires and impaling them into the candle, and we'll end up with like a bicycle spoke look. And then we're going to bend and manipulate the wires to create this little sort of hovering tray around your candle to decorate. So next week is going to be all about technique, not so much about the flowers. So you need to think about what sort of little festive groupings and decorations you want to scatter along this suspended tray on your candle. So I think in the handout I'm sending out with this video today, it says Medalino sticks. So those of you who bought the sticks for last week, you could be cutting those up and weaving those through. You might be using offcuts of ribbon. You might want to bring, test tubes if you happen to have them. I know we've used them in previous Zoom classes. You might want to put fresh flowers in, and you'll be suspending those off your little wire construction. So it's it's sort of a technique driven class and an odds and ends decoration class, and I'm sure all will become clear. And like all my classes, just come along with an open mind. You don't have to make and create with me. You can sit and watch and let it wash over you, perhaps have a look at what everyone else is doing afterwards, and then decide what materials you want. And of course, pick and choose the techniques you like. If you think you can do it better than me, go ahead and do it your way. Or if you want to slavishly copy what I've done, that is perfectly fine as well. So on to today's class. I'm going to move my candle out of the way. When we come to today's class, most of the work I'm going to do is on the overhead camera, because it's a simple process, but it is close-up detail work. And what I've got with me today is a ball of dried flower foam. So perhaps in the comments, if you're making and creating with me, leave me, if you're making on a dry ball, leave me comment dry. And if you've decided you want to use, all you've got is a wet ball, leave me wet. So I've got some dry coming through. Brilliant. So this is one of those things where these balls are quite well, in relation to a block of foam, they're quite pricey. So it may be that if you are looking after your pennies, that you might be using a block of foam, whether it's a block of dried or whether it's a block of fresh flower foam. And that probably, there are adaptations to all these projects. So if you are not sure what about you're going to use, we can talk about that in more detail afterwards. And then in my flower arranging stash, I've discovered up in my loft, I was having another declutter, I've got absolutely loads of these polystyrene balls, and these would be quite good as well for a sort of vague interpretation of what we're going to do today. And if we have time during the Make and Create session afterwards, I will show you how I would use one of these balls as well. So question about standard flower foam. So my question is, if your flower foam is green, it will soak up water. But if it's this grainy, grey brown colour, that is specially designed for dried flowers and for silk flowers. So before, if you have got the fresh green version for fresh flowers, which you would normally put into your bucket of water to soak, don't soak it just yet. I hope I've caught you before you've decided to soak it, because you may decide that you don't actually want to soak your foam. So again, we will talk about that later on. So I think at the moment it's just accept what you've got and keep the questions going. And of course, during the Q&A session afterwards, we can really get to grips with what you've got and how you might need to do that technique. So I've got 2 balls here. I have got my quite expensive dried stachys leaves. Now, the reason I bought these, I've been looking at these online for so long. These beautiful downy little bunny's ears, absolutely gorgeous. But from memory, how much they cost me? Probably 12 to 15 pounds for 100 of them. So quite pricey, but I thought I would treat myself in order that I could show them to you. And also I've got some bay leaves as well. Rather fortuitously, one of my neighbours cut back their bay tree this weekend, and there was a box in their front drive saying bay leaves, please collect. So you need some kind of leaf to cover over your ball. It doesn't want to be too big, so a laurel leaf would be too big, and it doesn't want to be too soft, so you don't want it tearing. If I hadn't got either of these 2 leaves with me, I would probably have picked some ivy from the fence in our garden. So I've got those, and then I've got pins, and I'll show all this to you up close. I'm just going to transfer them around so the top rests in the bottom. So these are the kind of pins that you would have on a buttonhole. So a pearl-headed pin, so with a knobble at the end. And then I've also got, so they would show up because you've got the little pin detail at the top. I've also got some decorative pins, which now as I open the box, I realised at some point in time I was very lazy, and I have seemed to have chucked a load of pearl-headed pins in there as well, which makes things slightly harder for me when I come to put them out. But these look like dressmaking pins, a sort of heavy-duty dressmaking pins without a decorative detail. You can barely see that, but it's just a slightly larger head than a dressmaking pin. And then I have dry foam, and I have an option with a little bit of wet foam, and we'll talk about that later. I have got a few cinnamon sticks. You don't need cinnamon sticks, but if you don't want your ball to roll around, and you may be happy with your ball rolling around if you're going to display it in a fruit bowl sort of setup, but if you wanted your ball to stand firm and not rock around, you're going to have to make, let's call them feet, not actually feet. So I'm going to use cinnamon sticks because we're getting to the festive period, but you could use ends of rose stems or twiggy stems that you've got. So I'll talk to you that a little bit later. And then to decorate, I haven't actually got any flowers this week. I have raided my box of damaged goods. I have got a box of lots of Christmas trimmings, and normally you can buy berries on a single stem, and over time they all break apart. So I thought this, because I'm not going to have much flower foam, these little just odds and ends would be really good for this project. I was thinking of using my hypericum berries I bought to class last week, which I didn't use, and I thought the time I cut the fresh hypericum berries up, they're going to look exactly the same as these fake berries. So that's why I've decided to go with the fake berries, and I can use the hypericum for something later on. And rather bizarrely as well, I've got a melon baller with me. And the only reason I ever use a melon baller is to scoop out flower foam. So that's just a little added extra. And I've got a glass of water, not to drink, but I've got this tiny piece of flower foam, the fresh flower foam and I'm going to need to soak it. So strictly speaking, because I've got all dried materials and they don't need to have a water source, I don't need to put any fresh foam into my little pomander ball. But if you have got fresh materials, you might have some lovely jip or some wax flower. I've been seeing lots of tiny roses that people have been using in my live classes recently. So you may have stuff that's needs a water source, and I will show you how to get that piece of flower foam into your little ball here. So I think probably now the time has come for me to bring the camera over my head, and then I will show you exactly what I'm going to do. So let's start off with the foam sphere. So what I'm going to do, rather than being a traditional pomander, you might think of being an orange, a fresh orange that you would stud with clothes and perhaps put a little red ribbon around it. We're taking that idea but making it a bit more modern. So I want to slice off a section of my flower foam, not in order for it to stand up, although as I think about that, that'd be quite a good idea, but to reveal a flat surface area where I could put some of my fresh flower foam if I wanted to add water, if my materials needed water. So it's up to you where you go. I mean, you could go and just slice your ball in half, which will give you a greater surface area. But because we're going a little bit modern, I fancy coming off at a jaunty angle. So I'm going to slice off here. So if you've not used this dry foam before, you can see as I'm trying to cut it, it's a little bit coarser, a little bit stiffer than your normal flower foam. So I am having to slice it backwards and forwards, and it does make a sort of horrible groany noise. I don't know whether the camera is picking up on that. So that's given me a little surface there, and the idea is it won't stand up because it's going to wobble, but of course you could flatten it that way around, but let's not confuse things. So I'm imagining that actually I'm going to be really jaunty, that when I put my little decorative details on the top here, I'm not going to have that piece standing direct, upright. I'm going to have it off to one side just for that little add-on here. And my inspiration for this is a Christmas present I was given last year. My sisters and I, we only do £5 presents for Christmas, and one of my sisters gave me a little pot, and as I look at it, it's probably exactly the same size as this, but that had a hole in it and it was slightly off centre, and I love it because I can either put it on my mantelpiece that way around so it looks like a ball, or I can put it this way around so you can see what's inside the pot. So you've got those two options. So I'm going to do a little prep work here. I'm imagining that I want to have some of the wet flower foam, the foam I can soak inside my little disc here, in order that it will be a water supply for my material. So let's pretend I'm not using fake berries. Let's pretend that all my berries are actual fresh plant material. So you could go, just go freestyle and start digging a hole out. But I thought, as I've got this milk bottle lid, I would just put it in to give me a circle. So this doesn't have to be a circle. You can cut out whatever shape you like. So carefully going round with my old table knife, I'm going to just dig out this central area. And that's why I've got my melon ball. I'm thinking if I can't get on with my knife, perhaps a teaspoon would help me, or perhaps my melon baller would help me. So I'm easing that out there, just sort of pushing it out like that. But I have got, a reasonable sized hole. If I want to make that hole a little bit bigger, you could use a teaspoon or a melon baller and just scoop out a little bit more. Oh, it's quite satisfying doing this. It's making a horrible noise though. So I've got a reservoir basically. And then what I've got here is a tiny piece of cellophane. So I've cut this up a roll, but if you've bought flowers or you save the wrappings for your flowers, you've probably got a piece of cellophane near you as well. You might have a piece of cling film or an old sandwich bag. I'm having trouble cutting it here. So you just need a small piece, because I want to make sure that when I have wet my flower foam, it's not going to soak into, it's not going to leak out of the of that central bit of foam. It won't stay there because of course there's nothing holding it flat, but that's the idea. And then with an offcut of flower foam, so at last these offcuts that you've been saving have come into use. And here I'm going to use my bottle lid again, just to give me a template. So I can push that down like that. Just means you don't have to eye things up, just makes it a little bit easier. So for ease here, I then cut round in a square, get rid of that, and then come round to shape it. And then the idea being, once that's wet, I'm just going to sort of do a dry fit to make sure I've got enough off. I think that will probably be fine, like that. It's going to be flush when I've finished. I might just to make sure. Those bits, and then my glass of water over here. We soak a piece of flower foam, and this will take seconds. So you can see that already soaked. So I put it in my container, and then very gently, because I don't want to crush the foam, but you can see how nicely that fits in. But then I'm just going to cut away the excess. I think I must have a really blunt pair of scissors, or perhaps I'm thinking a pair of scissors that need washing. If you ever find that you're cutting up your sachets of flower food, cutting them open with your flower arranging scissors, if you're using the liquid flower food, they do get very gummed up. So it's good practice anyway to recut your foam. I'm just going to drop those bits of Oasis flower foam onto the floor to clear up later. So there is our mechanics done. I've got the opportunity for a little bit of fresh flower to go in there. But now, of course, I need to cover up this horrible, gritty flower foam. And this is where my beautiful leaves come in. So let's see if I can get that to go over its heavy side. So these are the gorgeous leaves, absolutely beautiful. So I'm getting a question through. Do the leaves have to be very small? Yes, they do. It's one of those things where the leaves have to be sufficiently small and sufficiently flexible. They can go around the curve of your structure. If you use too large a leaf, they won't bend, but also you'll start to get a bit of gappage, probably here. So probably these little leaves, which are the length of my little finger, are probably the biggest you'd want to have on this size ball. I didn't measure this ball, it's probably only about 8 centimetres. And if you are using fresh materials, so the bay leaves, which will dry naturally, the ivy, which will dry naturally, they will shrink a little bit. So it's not the thing to do is overlap your leaves slightly, so that if you get any shrinkage, you don't expose the bare flower foam. So with these preserved leaves, they're not going to shrink any more than they won't shrink. I will still need to overlap them because the leaves are oval, and you can't get ovals to sit next to each other without the little gaps showing. So you will need to place them carefully. So I think to show up, I will use my pearl-headed pins so you can see what I'm doing. But if I was making this, just not in front of the camera, I would probably use my little dressmaking pins, these little heavy-duty pins here, because they will do the job, but they are quite discreet. Again, that's not me showing up, but you know what a dressmaking pin looks like. So what I'm going to do is to take my leaf right over the edge. I don't know if the camera is picking it up, but my cellophane is raised probably ½ centimetre up there. But I'm happy that when I get my plant material in there, my real berries, my fake berries, that'll hide it. If you want to trim that closer, go ahead and trim that closer. So I am putting the leaf up to the top, and I'm going to pin it like that, and then bring it straight over the edge. And I'm going to pin it at the bottom, but I'm only going to pin it to hold it. Can you see how that pin's sticking up? Because each leaf is probably going to have 2 pins in it, but I'll probably use this pin to pin the top of the leaf underneath, if that makes sense. So I don't want to, like all your mechanics, you don't want it to be more pin than leaf. So taking my next leaf and going over the top, so fitting them together. Now this leaf looks a little bit shorter. So I guess if you were really pernickety about, really careful about how you work, you could put all your leaves out and choose all the ones sort of the same size. perhaps the smaller ones, but I'm not that kind of person, so I'm not going to do that. So up at the top, round at the bottom, and I'm just holding that in place at the bottom. So just part the way in. So you can see what I'm going to do. Now the question is, am I going to do the whole ball? I probably won't do the whole ball for this practice piece, this demonstration piece, because you'll spend the next 2 hours watching me do my pinning. But I'll aim to go halfway around, and then you can see, and then I'll finish it off in the make and create session. But can you see here, if I sort of tracked around here, this would be where the underside of the leaf before was sort of looped round. And that's what I mean about having a nice overlap. Don't be skimpy. If you're using fresh leaves, the bay or the ivy, don't be skimpy. You know, stop what if you're running out, stop work, go back, you know, go back and collect some more, because you'll regret it. In a couple of days, when they start to dry, they will lift and ruffle slightly, and you don't want to see a flash of the flower foam underneath. It's not particularly attractive. And if we were being really precise as well, you can see I'm getting a nice circle of pins around the top. You might want to, you know, be really, again, depending on your workmanship, do you want to reposition the pins so they're equal distances? At the moment, I'm just eyeing it up. And as I say, it shows up because they're pearl-headed pins, so you can see it. But I would probably, out of preference, use my skinny stainless steel pins, and it wouldn't be so obvious where the placements were. I think there's still some sound problems, but I think that's just for one of you. So I shall continue on. Perhaps you can wave. Can I give a thumbs up? Can you hear me? Everyone else, can you hear me okay? So all I can say, I know it doesn't help at all, but this sort of leaving the meeting and rejoining is the only technical advice I can give you. I'm not going to go all the way around at the top, but you can see I've gone nearly all the way around. You go all the way around, and then of course, you've got the bottom that isn't covered. So then you would go over the bottom leaves. So I'm going to take out that pin that was holding everything. In fact, I might take out the first 2 pins, and it's up to you whether you go, that was the first leaf. Do you go directly over the first leaf, or can you see the little gap that I created? I'm going to go over the gap a little bit like brickwork. If you ever look at the bricks on the side of your house, they are offset slightly. So that's what I'm going to do, is come down and go over the gap. So that's leaf 1, leaf 2, I'm going to go between it. I think that will become obvious when you're working, rather than just always, you know, following the leaf down exactly. We're offsetting. So here I'll take out that pin that was only half in, I'll rest it over the top, pin that in place. You can see here this next pin's a little bit in the way, so I'm going to take that down now and pin that down the bottom, and just work your way around. So it's just slowly and methodically going round. So putting that over the top, pinning that in place, and I will probably just do this one more, and then I'll show you. So I need to take that pin out from underneath and put that one in the top. And as you come to the bottom, it may be that you don't need all these pins at the bottom as well. You just need to be able to hold them. I might just put them there, just make sure it's catching everything. I reckon I've caught all that 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves with just 2 pins. You can see that gives you a lovely textural detail, almost looks like an exotic apple or something like that. But just imagine I went all the way around the top first, and then all the way around the top at the bottom. So the size of leaf I've got, I've managed just to have 2 rows of leaves. Any smaller, you might have 3 rows of leaves, but you don't want it to be one huge leaf, because I think we're going to end up with too much gappage going around. So just remember, just try and imagine I've got a green cannonball or an apple here. And I've already said to you that I fancy having it sitting on my table at a slight angle, but you can see that the weight of that tiny disc of flower foam is making it want to do its own thing. And because I don't want it to be bang upright, I want to see if I can get it off to the side a little bit. I'm going to make a little grid on the bottom using my cinnamon sticks to hold it in place. So cinnamon sticks. I've picked out 3 that are approximately the same size. And I'm going to trim these down. So my scissors should be able to do it. I've trimmed that down. That's what, about 3 centimeters or so. They do smell gorgeous as I trim them like this. So these are, they've been in the loft since last Christmas, these particular cinnamon sticks. I'm going to put a wire on them and then attach them to the base and to make a little triangle to hold my, just hold everything steady a little bit. So I'm going to take my floristry wires, and I will, again, if this isn't clear, I can add, I'll probably add another little clip at the end of the video, just so you can see what I'm doing. I move my rubbish away. So I'm holding my little stick here, and I'm holding my wire all the way down here. So I've probably got 1/4 of my wire at the top and 3/4 at the bottom. I'm going to wrap my wire around my pine cone. I've gone round 3 times there. You get a little knobbly bit, 2 loose wires here, and I'm just going to twist them at the back and then trim them to the same length. That's probably, I'll probably go about 3 centimeters. So I just got these little legs I've created. So I'll whisk up the other 2. So 1/4 above, it doesn't matter because you know exactly how much above. And if you were really careful, you might even be able to get, you know, cut a wire in half and use it, but I think that might be a little bit too tight. My last wire here, around a couple of times. And if you really wanted to finish off and, you know, up your workmanship skills, this is when you could, you know, tie a bit of string on there to disguise it. It's going to be at the bottom, you won't see it. And because you're being ultra neat with your twists, I don't think that will cause a problem. So I want to, mindful of the fact it's top heavy, I just need to sort of think, how is it going to sit and stand? Is it going to hold in place? And this is always the things about your floristry work, is it's all about the balance. And yes, I might not want it straight up and down, but if it's the only way I can get it to hold, I might have to do it so it is directly upwards. But I did want to get a little bit of a jaunty angle here. So if that's going to be the bottom, imagine it's all covered with leaves. I take my little feet and I push them into the flower foam. Oops. Oh, a satisfying crunch. And then take my next piece. I'm going to sort of create a little bit of a triangle. So this time I'm going through my leaves. You'll be going through your leaves as well. A little bit of a crunch there. And across the bottom, a little bit of a crunch there. So I've got these 3 flat little legs. Oh, fingers crossed. Oh, thank goodness for that, it's worked. I was just fearful that if I had it too far over the wet foam, that it was just going to totally flop over, but it has anchored it nicely. So a deep sigh of relief all the way around. So if I'm honest, these don't look, you know, it does look a little bit unsightly with the green there, but it's as close as I could make it. And actually, when it's sitting down, all you're going to see is that side view. So I don't think that looks too bad. But if you want to cover that up with a bit of string, go ahead and cover it up with a bit of string. And then it comes to the decoration. And you've got your little piece here. So this really is about the technique of leaf pinning and a technique of getting your ball to sit upright. But in terms of decorations, you will hardly need anything at all. And if you weren't using, so because I'm not using fresh flowers, I didn't have to do that insert piece at all. For those of you who have got the full green flower foam ball, I would not soak it. So I would just accept that your leaves, if they are fresh leaves, because they are quite robust, the leaves, they will just dry naturally over time. I would do the scooping out. So if you've got the green flower foam, I would hollow out the section and then keep that little bit that you took out, nestle it in the cellophane once you've watered it, and then put it back in, so that your water basically isn't leaking out everywhere. As soon as you wet that flower foam, all of it, you just run the risk that it's going to drip water and spoil your surfaces. But this will be something that I can keep in situ for as long as I want, because the leaves aren't going to degrade anymore. Certainly not my preserved leaves. Of course, if you've got your bay, that will dry naturally. If you overhandle it, they'll start to chip. And the ivy leaves won't last quite so long, but I would say they'll last till Christmas, as long as you don't fiddle with it, and as long as you're willing to accept they'll go slightly darker over time. And I would say with your fresh leaves, just to reiterate it again, really make sure you're overlapping them quite tightly. So in terms of my little bits and pieces, I've even got some of my figs left over from last week. I wonder whether we can get those in there. But these literally are the dregs of what I've got in my little flower arranging stash. I can't bear to throw any of these little berries and baubles away, because even the tiniest of things can get used again. But if you're using your fresh flowers, this would look gorgeous. How about jip? Just a cloud of jip over the top, or a cloud of wax flower, or going around your garden now when we think there's nothing in our gardens, and just see what lovely little tiny stems you can find. So get arranging. So you can see here, this is why I didn't fastidiously cut back my cellophane, because number one, it was too fiddly, and number two, by the time I get all these little decorative details in, I won't be able to see the flower foam. And these little things here, tiny Christmas baubles. I've taken the hanger off and glued in a kebab stick, and you can see I've used hot glue. It's all bubbled up there. So that's quite a good way. I find them a bit fiddly for hanging on the Christmas tree because you can't see them. But I've just given them a little bit of a stem. So here I might go all red berries, but because I've got some that are glitzy, some that look more natural looking, some are waxy looking. I've got a few here with a little orangey hue to them, and I could just mound and pile them in. I don't think even though my figs are tiny, I don't think I'm going to use this. I think I'm just going to have a ball of red and just layer it all on top of one another. Actually, I've cut that one down short. I've just spotted I've got a matte bauble here. I think perhaps a matte one might look better, because the two of them are quite large. I don't want it to look like two shiny eyes. I'm going to go matte at the bottom here. And of course, everything I'm using is circular, so it's very hard to cover up your flower foam, because you're always going to have little gaps, which is why I've gone a little bit high rise. Can you see with that berry there? It's sort of on the second layer round, and that's the way to get over your problems of trying to fix your berries in place, is by to layer them up. I took that one out and repositioned them because they were both a red berry, an orangey berry, and they were both coming up next to each other. I wanted to separate those out. There's tiny little berries here. This one's got a bit of sparkle on it. Sparkle over there. I reckon I've only got room for two more. So this one's got a, oops, I've broken the stem of that. This is a darker one, and another darker one. Just like that. And if you were worried that things weren't going to stick, you could always use your hot glue gun. This sort of a mash-up between crafts and the flowers. And I need to make sure you turn everything as well. Now I've got those, and I'm thinking I've got room for just a little bit more. What else can I fit in there? So I'm going for something that is a lovely modern look. And imagine that it looks a little bit like a Christmas pudding. And just a more modern take on a pomander, and something you could have on your side, from now onwards, because it doesn't really look like a Christmas decoration. Hopefully it's that sort of transition period. We need time to decorate our homes. We can't suddenly on Christmas Eve have this beautifully decorated house. It does take us quite a while to get there. So what I'm going to do is to bring the camera back to me, and I will try and hold the little pomander up so you can see it. So I'll show you the good side here where I finished it, and then the secret side of the back here where I will have to finish off. So what I'm going to do when we make them crisp, I'm going to take all my berries out and start again. so I can get my leaves underneath them. And if I turn it up at the bottom, actually, as I turn it up, I can feel water dripping out. So that is the reason why, if you have got a totally green flower foam ball that takes water, I wouldn't soak the whole ball. I would just soak the little chunk that you need. And those are the little legs there that have enabled the pomander to sit rock steady, so it's not going anywhere. So I'll just turn off my camera here and then come back to the main camera. And I just think I need to go through some of your questions. I can see some questions popping up. I'm just a tiny bit too far away from my laptop. I'm struggling to read them. I think the compliments might have been, I think the comments might have been compliments. So I can see that some of you haven't been able to watch, but that's fine, isn't it? You know, the phone rings, it doesn't matter. You'll always get the recorded video afterwards. So I'm going to hold it there so you can't see last week's arrangement, so you'll concentrate on this one. But it is this modern pomander ball. So you can see now that if you happen to have one of these polystyrene balls in your craft stash, how you could make the same thing, you know, using what you've already got. And whether or not you take that initial slice off is up to you. But I particularly wanted, I didn't want my berries to be on the outer surface. I sort of wanted to create that area of interest at the top so that it would sit, you know, slightly offset at a jaunty angle. It won't bounce on the palm of my hand, but you get the idea. So I am going to finish this off while we're making and creating afterwards. So I shall say goodbye to those of you who are watching on the recorded class. I will do a close-up of me wiring the cinnamon sticks in place, and a close-up of the actual finished arrangement as well. So I'll tag that onto the end of the video so you get a complete picture of what we're doing. So for those of you who are here, I'm going to stop the recording, and then I will take you all off mute, and any questions you can ask them live, and we can talk about specifically what materials you've got and what adaptations you might need, particularly those of you who want to go foam free, and how you're going to create this look. Perhaps if you're using your agro wool or you're using a ball of moss. So we'll have to wait and see. There's another thing I meant to tell you. What if you haven't got any pearl-headed pins? I totally forgot about that. If you haven't got any pearl-headed pins, what you can do is to take your floristry wire and cut it up. So my wire is, I don't know, is at least 20 centimeters long. If I cut it up into 3 centimeter chunks and then fold it in half, it becomes a little pin. And again, I will show a close-up of that. So what you could do with your leaves, if I show you here with the bay leaf, is you would hold your leaf and then you would use this little sort of U-bend clip. Isn't that showing up better on there? Not entirely sure it is. It looks like that. I'm not sure you can see it. I will do a close-up of this afterwards. And you can use that to pin your leaves in place. So you don't need to have the pearl-headed pins. You just, and actually the green is quite nice because the green, the wire, it blends more into the leaf. So you would just need to sort of sit there, not do it one at a time. I would suggest once you've got the first one in and you're happy with the length of it, is to then go through and chop up, you know, 3 or 4 wires, so you're not bending them each time, so get a bit of a production line going. So I shall switch off the recording and then we'll go to our live Q&A.